So there are several ways to do this in CSS. One way is to use Flexbox again. Now, before we use Flexbox, we're going to make the app container stretch to the bottom of the browser. So right now, if we click inside here and we right-click and inspect, and we go to the Elements tab, and we scroll up and look at the app container, notice that the app container stops at the chat input section. And that's because this is all the content that we have. So the app container only has the height that it needs. However, we want to stretch the app container to the bottom of the browser so that we can put the chat input at the bottom. To do that, we're going to set the height of the app container. So we'll go back to our code and we'll scroll up to our CSS and we're going to find the styles for the app container, which is right here. And at the end, we're going to set the height, colon. And now we want the height of the app container to stretch to be the same as the height of the browser here. To do that, we're going to give this a special value, 100 VH. So VH stands for viewport height. This gives us the height of the browser, or the part of the page that is visible. 100 VH means 100% of the height of the browser. So this means the app container will be 100% of this height. So now let's save, and we'll go to our website, and we'll open the console again by right-clicking and inspect, and go to the Elements tab, and we'll scroll up to the app container again. And now you'll notice the app container stretches to the bottom of the browser. However, the app container is actually a little too tall, so it actually stretches below the bottom of the page. And now we can scroll a bit here. The reason it's a little bit too tall is because by default, the body element here has a default margin of 8 pixels on all sides. So the app container is the same height as the browser, but then we add another 8 pixels on the top and bottom. To fix this issue, we can just remove the default margin from the body. So we'll go back to our code and scroll up to the styles for the body. And at the end, let's remove the margin at the top and bottom by typing margin-top, colon, and we'll set it to 0 pixels. And we'll also set the margin-bottom, colon, to 0 pixels, and save. So now, after we remove the default margin from the top and the bottom, the app container is now exactly the same height as the browser. Now that the app container stretches to the bottom of the browser, we can use a Flexbox to make the chat messages grow and push the chat input to the bottom. Again, there are 3 steps to use a Flexbox. So here, we want to position the chat messages and the chat input. So we need a container around these elements. And we already have a container for this, which is the app container. The second step is to add display flex to the container. So we'll go back to our code, and we're going to scroll to the app container styles, which is right here. And below this, we'll add display colon flex. Let's save our code. And unfortunately, it totally messed up our design. So what happened? By default, Flexbox positions our elements horizontally. So it takes all the elements inside the container and then squeezes them into a row like we see here. However, this time we want to position the elements vertically, not horizontally. To position the elements vertically, we're going to use a Flexbox feature called Flex Direction. So in here, we'll type flex dash direction, colon. Flex direction determines which direction the elements are positioned. So flex direction is row by default. That means it positions the elements horizontally, like we see here. Now, we're going to change flex direction to column. So this positions the elements vertically in a column. If we save our code and check the website, the elements in the Flexbox are now positioned vertically, from top to bottom. Next, we're going to use Flex Grow again. As a review, Flex Grow makes an element grow and take up the remaining space. Here, we want to make the chat messages section grow and take up all the remaining vertical space, and this will push the chat input down to the bottom. To use Flex Grow, we're going to add a class to the chat messages section. We'll go to our code and we'll scroll down to the chat messages component, which is right here. And currently, this component uses a fragment. And remember, we cannot style a fragment since fragments don't appear on the website. So again, we're going to switch this to a div element, and at the end, /div, so that we can style it. And now we'll give this div a class using class name equals double quotes, and we'll give it the class chat dash messages dash container. And now let's style this class. We'll scroll up in our CSS, and at the end here, we'll type dot, and we'll style the class chat dash messages dash container and curly brackets. And we'll use the Flexbox feature flex dash grow colon 1. So now let's save. And this makes the chat message container grow and take up the remaining vertical space. And this will push the chat input to the bottom of the browser. So that's how we use a Flexbox to position the chat input at the bottom. Finally, if we look at the final design, we have some space at the top of the app and at the bottom of the app. So let's add that space at the top and bottom to our website. We'll go to our CSS, and currently the app container has a special height of 100 VH. So let's avoid changing this. Instead, let's add space above the chat messages container. So we'll scroll down to the chat messages container, and we'll add some space at the top using margin dash top colon 20 pixels. And we'll also add some space below the chat input container. So we'll scroll up to the chat input container, which is right here, and we'll add space at the bottom using margin dash bottom colon, and let's try 60 pixels and save. And now that looks pretty good. And now if we look at our website and compare it to the final design, you can see that it looks the same as the final design. So we finished styling our project to look like the final design using CSS. Next, we're going to make the chat messages scrollable. In the final project, if we have more chat messages than we can see in the browser, we can actually scroll to see all of the chat messages. Now you may need to add more chat messages down here in order to see this feature. So we're going to create this feature in our project. If we go to our project and we add some more messages like test and press send, notice if we have too many messages, it starts to push the chat input down. To make our chat messages scrollable, we're going to go to the CSS and we're going to find the chat messages container, which is right here. And at the end, we'll add a property overflow : scroll. So now if the chat messages overflow or there's too many to be displayed, it will start to scroll instead of pushing things down. Let's save our code and then add another message, test, and press send. And you may need to add a few more messages to see this feature. Now, if we have too many messages, we're able to scroll up and down to see all the messages. Now, before we continue, on Windows, we have a small problem, which is we start to see these thick scroll bars on the sides, which doesn't look very good. To hide these scroll bars, we can go back to our CSS, and at the end, we can use the property scroll bar dash width : none. So now let's save. And if we add a message test and press send, and you might need to add more messages for your project. Now, if we have more messages than we can see, we can scroll and we hide the scroll bars. So that's how we make the chat messages scrollable. The last feature we're going to add to our project is auto scrolling. For example, if we go down here and add the message test and press send, notice we have to manually scroll down to the bottom ourselves. But if we go to the final project and at the bottom add a message test and press send, notice that it automatically scrolls to the bottom of the chat messages. So we're going to add this auto scrolling feature. Let's go back to our website. And to create auto scrolling, we're going to learn one of the most important features of React, called hooks. Hooks let us insert React features into our component. And we've actually used hooks before. React.useState is a hook. It inserts a React feature called state into our component. And state automatically updates the HTML when the data changes. Now, React has other hooks that we can use, and every hook starts with the word use. Another hook is called useEffect. UseEffect lets us run some code after the component is created or updated. So in our project, after we add a chat message, we want to run some code to scroll to the bottom. So this is a perfect situation for useEffect. Inside our code, we're going to scroll down to the chat messages component, which is here. And at the top of the component, we're going to type the code R React dot use E effect and brackets. By the way, in React, we should put our hooks at the top of the component, and they should not be inside anything. So don't put a hook inside an if statement or inside a function. Next, we'll give useEffect a function. So inside these brackets, we'll type a function using brackets, arrow, and curly brackets. As a reminder, when we give a function to another function, we usually use an arrow function because it's a bit cleaner. So React will run this function after the component is created and every time the component is updated. Inside here, let's try console.log the string updated and save. And now if we go to our project and we look at the console, so we'll right click, inspect, and we go to the console, you'll see that after the component is created, it runs the function and displays updated. And then we're going to go to our website and we're going to add a new message like hello and press send. So now after the component is updated, React runs the function again. So as you can see, useEffect lets us run some code after the component is created or updated. So now let's go back into our code and we'll give useEffect a second parameter. So at the end, we'll type a comma and we'll give a second parameter, which is an array. So this array controls when useEffect runs. If we give it an empty array, useEffect will only run once after the component is created. Now, inside this array, we can also put some data, such as our chat messages. So we'll type chat messages. And now React will also run this function every time our data changes or every time our chat messages changes. If we save and we look at the console, useEffect runs after the component is created. And now if we add a message like hello and press send, useEffect also runs after chat messages changes. So now let's go back to our code. And this is called a dependency array. It lets us control when useEffect runs. A best practice is to give useEffect a dependency array to avoid running this function too often. So now we learned hooks and the useEffect hook. And now we can run some code after the chat messages changes. The last step is after the chat messages changes, we want to automatically scroll to the bottom. To scroll to the bottom, first we need to get the HTML element that we want to scroll into our JavaScript. Let's go back to our code. And inside this function, instead of console.log, we need to get this div, chat messages container, into our JavaScript. Now, in normal JavaScript, we might use the DOM to get this element. But remember, in React, we should not use the DOM manually. Instead, we should use React features to get this element. To get this element using React, we're going to use another hook called useRef. So at the top of this component, we're going to type the code capital R React dot use capital R ref and brackets. useRef lets us automatically save an HTML element from the component. So this code creates a ref. A ref is a container with special React features. One special feature is we can give this ref or this container to React, and React can automatically save an HTML element inside this ref or inside this container. So between these brackets, we're first going to put the value null. So this is the initial value that is saved inside this ref or inside this container. So the ref is going to start out as empty. So that's why we use null. Now let's save an HTML element inside this ref. To do that, first we're going to save this ref in a variable. So at the front, we'll create a variable using const and we'll name it chat messages ref equals this result. And then we're going to go to the HTML element we want to save, which is this div, the chat messages container. And we're going to give this element a special prop called ref equals curly brackets. And between the curly brackets, we're going to give it the ref that we created above, which is chat messages ref. So now React will take this HTML element and save it inside this ref or inside this container. To access the HTML element saved inside a ref, we're going to go to Use Effect. And we're going to type the name of the ref, which is chat messages ref, and then .current. Now, the reason we put this code in Use Effect is because remember, Use Effect runs after the component is created. So we need to wait for the component to be created first, and then we can access this HTML element. So now let's console.log this value to see what's inside this ref. So at the front, we'll console.log, open bracket, and close bracket, and save. And we'll open the console for our website. And you'll see that React saved the chat messages container inside our ref. Now that we have the HTML element we need to scroll, let's learn how to scroll it to the bottom. Let's go back to our code. And first, we're going to save this HTML element in a variable. So we'll remove this. And at the front, we'll create a variable const. And let's name it container lm equals this result. So ending the variable name with lm tells us that this variable contains an HTML element. And I'll resize my code editor so we can see more of the code. Next, we'll create a new line. And it's a good idea to check if this element actually exists before we scroll it. So we'll check if brackets container lm. Finally, we'll type curly brackets. And to scroll this element to the bottom, we can use this code. Container lm dot scroll top, and we'll make it equal container lm dot scroll height. So scroll top means how far from the top should we scroll. And scroll height gives us the total height of the element. So if we set the scroll top to the total height, it's going to scroll all the way down to the bottom, which is exactly what we need. So now let's save this code. And we'll go to our website and we'll add a message test and press send. It runs the use effect function because chat messages changed, and it automatically scrolls to the bottom. Now, depending on the height of your browser, you might need to add a few more messages to see this effect. So we can also scroll up and then add another message like thank you and press send. It runs use effect again and it automatically scrolls to the bottom. And that's all the major features that we need for this project. I'll leave some extra features like removing these default messages and creating the loading spinner as exercises. And that's it. We created all the styling and features that we need, and we finished the chatbot project. In the next lesson, we'll learn how to do a proper React setup so we can organize our code into different files and folders instead of putting everything into one HTML file. And this will help us work on bigger React projects. And that's the end of this lesson. In this lesson, we learned how to use CSS with React. We styled the chatbot project. We reviewed Flexbox, which lets us create a flexible layout. We learned the ternary operator, which lets us insert an if-else statement directly in the JSX. We learned hooks, which lets us insert React features into our components. We learned the use effect hook, which lets us run some code after the component is created or updated. We learned the use ref hook, which lets us automatically save an HTML element from the component. And we created the auto scroll feature for the chat messages. Here are some exercises to help you practice what we learned in this lesson. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to do a proper React setup. Right now, all of our HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code is combined into one HTML file, chatbot.html. Now, it's not good to combine all of our code in 3 different languages into one file, because if we work on bigger projects, this file might contain thousands of lines of code, and it will be almost impossible to manage all of that code if we put it all in one file. Instead, we're going to do a proper React setup that will let us split up this code into different files and folders. To create this React setup, we'll need to use the command line. So first, let's review the command line. We're going to go to VS Code, and I'm going to make this full screen. And to open the command line, we're going to click the menu at the top, and we're going to click the terminal menu, and we're going to open a new terminal. So here, we can give an instruction or a command to the computer. For example, we're going to type the command mkdir. Mkdir means make directory. A directory is another name for a folder. So make directory creates a new folder. Then we'll type a space, and we'll give this folder a name, like test. If we press enter, it creates a new folder named test. So if we open our files on the left, you'll see that it created a new folder named test. If that does not work for you, you can check the troubleshooting steps in the description. So on this line here, we can give instructions or commands to our computer. And that's why this is called the command line. And a terminal basically lets us use the command line, and it also lets us view the output of the command line up here. So we created a new folder using this command. Now you might be wondering, why did the folder get created here inside our project folder? As a review, the command line runs inside a specific folder. To see which folder the command line is currently running in, we can go to the bottom and type this command, pwd, or print working directory, and press enter. And this command tells us the command line is currently running in the React-course folder, which is our project folder right here. That means any commands that we give to the computer will be done inside this folder. If we make a directory, it will create the new directory inside this folder, like we see here. If we give it another command, like ls or list, and press enter, it will list everything inside this folder. So it will list everything here. As you can see, the command line runs inside a specific folder. Now, this folder that the command line is running in is called the working directory, or the working folder. The last thing we need to review about the command line is how to change the working directory. To do that, we're going to go to the bottom, and we're going to type the command cd, or change directory, and then press space, and then the name of the folder we want to change to, like test. The command line will look for this folder in the working directory, which is here, and then it's going to go into this folder. So now if we press enter, and then type print working directory, and press enter, it will tell us the command line is now running inside the test folder. So the command line basically went inside this test folder, and it's running inside here. By the way, this is known as a file path. The slash here means that the test folder is inside the React-course folder. So now if we give a command like ls and press enter, it will list everything inside the test folder because the command line is running inside this test folder. and it tells us there's nothing inside the test folder. Finally, to get out of the test folder, we can type cd or change directory and then space and use the special value dot dot. Dot dot represents the outer folder. If we press enter, the command line will go out of the test folder and back into the React-course folder. If we type the command pwd or print working directory and press enter, it will tell us the command line is running in the React-course folder again. So using cd or change directory, we can change which folder the command line is running in, and we can basically move around our computer. So this is just a review of the command line. The second thing we need for the React setup is Node.js. So we're going to review Node.js. First, make sure you have the correct version of Node.js installed. To do that, you can click this link in the description, scroll down to lesson 5, and follow the instructions here to install the correct version of Node.js. After Node.js is installed, let's go back to VS Code. And if you just installed Node.js, we need to restart VS Code to make sure that Node.js is loaded. So we're going to click X in the top right of the terminal, and then close VS Code. And then we're going to open VS Code again. And we're going to open our project folder, React-course, and we're going to open a new terminal. So in the top menu, we're going to go to the terminal section and then open a new terminal. Now, when we install Node.js, it's going to add a new command to our command line called node. So the node command lets us run JavaScript code outside of a browser. For example, here we have a file called react-basics.js, and inside we have some simple JavaScript code. If you don't have this file, feel free to pause the video and create this file. Now, we can give this file to Node, and it will run the JavaScript code in this file. So here, we'll use the node command and type space and give it the file to run, which is react-basics.js, and press enter. So this will run the JavaScript inside this file, and it console.logs hello. So as you can see, the node command lets us run JavaScript code outside of our browser. Now, when we install Node.js, it also adds another command to our command line called npm. npm stands for Node Package Manager. A package is basically an external library. So npm lets us install external libraries or packages into our project. To do that, we can use the command npm space install, and then space, and then the name of an external library or package. As an example, we'll install the package super simple dev. This is a package that I created that we can use as an example, and press enter. On Windows, if you get an error like this, you'll need to run this command first, and then run npm install supersimpledev again. If that still does not work for you, you can check the troubleshooting steps in the description. Once npm install finishes, npm will download this external library or this package into a folder called Node Modules. If we open this folder, we see the supersimpledev package, and inside, this contains the code that we've been using in the chatbot project, like react.js and chatbot.js. npm contains millions of packages that we can download and use in our project. and you can search for packages on the NPM website. So this is just a review of Node.js and NPM. Now that we reviewed Node.js and NPM, we're ready to do a proper React setup. We just learned that NPM has millions of packages available to use. Some of these packages also add a command to our command line. For example, there's a package called create-vite. If we install this package, it also adds a command to our command line called create-vite. The create-vite command helps us set up a new React project. To use the create-vite command, we need to do two steps. Number one, we need to install the create-vite package. And number two, we're going to run the create-vite command in the command line. Now, NPM actually has a shortcut for this called npx. npx does these two steps in one step. The X means execute. So let's go to our command line and let's type the command npx create-vite. And then we'll also type the @ symbol. @ means we're going to use a specific version of the create-vite command. For this video, we're going to use a specific version so that you have the same code that I do and you can follow along. To get the version of create-vite we're going to use, we're going to click this link in the description. Go to lesson 5, and here you'll find the version of create-vite we're going to use. You can also find the full command here. By the way, the version that you see in this video might be different than the version you see on your page. You should always use the version that you see on your page. I did this because it's hard to update the video. So this lets me easily update the version in the future. So select the version on your page, copy, and in our command line, we're going to paste it after the @ So again, this command will install the create-vite package, and then it will run the create-vite command. The create-vite command will help us set up a new React project. By the way, in some tutorials, they might use the command npm create-vite. This is just a shortcut for npx create-vite. Now let's press enter. If it says it needs to install this package, we can press Y for yes and press enter. Now, the create-vite command will ask us some questions. First, it will ask us for a project name. So let's name it chatbot-project and press enter. And then it will ask us what technology we want to use in our project. So we're going to press the down arrow and select React and press enter. And it will ask us what other tools we want in our project. We're going to press down and just select JavaScript and press enter. And create-vite will create an empty React project at this location or this folder right here. Next, we're going to go into this folder with our command line. To do that, we can use the command cd or change directory and give it the folder name chatbot